too hard.
Ifoma, wait. Please don't do this.
I don't want you to go.
I know, but this is our future. I promise I'll succeed.
The evidence confirms my client's innocence.
The lecture halls of the General Studies GST building at the University of Nigeria, Nsukka, were often a chaotic blend of ambitious dreams and the humid heat of the afternoon. It was here, amidst the droning of a lecturer discussing Social Sciences 101, that Tochukwu, a sharp-eyed law freshman, first noticed Ifoma. While others were nodding off, Ifoma sat with a poise that commanded attention. She was a pharmacy student, her desk cluttered with thick textbooks and a neatly labeled notebook. Their eyes met during a brief debate on the ethics of medicine and law. Tochukwu was impressed by her logic. Ifoma was captivated by his eloquence. The intentional years. By their second year, the casual smiles in the hallway had transformed into long walks along the Love Garden and late-night study sessions at the Princess Alexandra Auditorium. By the dawn of their third year, they had moved past the puppy love phase. They were intentional. Tochukwu, despite his humble background being a self-sponsored student with no wealthy uncles to pave his way, promised Ifoma a future built on sheer grit. Ifoma, in turn, became his anchor, often sharing her pocket money or bringing him meals during the stressful periods of law school preparation. The breaking point. The final year brought a cold reality. The bubble of university life was about to burst, and the outside world was waiting with its demands. Tochukwu's struggle. As an orphan with no family backing, he knew his path was long. He had law school ahead, followed by years of undershagging, junior pupillage, before he could even dream of a stable income. Ifoma's pressure. As a beautiful pharmacy graduate from a reputable family, the suitors arrived in droves. Her parents, particularly her father, were adamant. They viewed Tochukwu as a starving artist of the legal world. They wanted her settled immediately with someone who could provide the security a pharmacist deserved. In a tearful conversation behind the Faculty of Pharmaceutical Sciences, they looked at the gap between their hearts and their realities. Tochukwu, out of a painful, selfless love, told her, "Ifoma, I cannot ask you to wait 10 years for a man who is still looking for a ground to stand on. Your parents are right. You deserve a life that isn't a gamble." The divergent paths. Ifoma eventually succumbed to the relentless pressure. She married Henry, a brilliant medical doctor. Henry was the perfect choice on paper. He worked in his father's prestigious private hospital, drove a luxury car, and offered Ifoma a life of immediate comfort. But comfort is not the same as connection. Ifoma moved to a large house, practiced pharmacy, and lived the life of a socialite. Yet, every time she saw a man in a black suit and a white bib, her heart skipped a beat. She followed the news, searching for one name: the rise of the barrister. While Ifoma lived in a gilded cage, Tochukwu used his poverty as fuel. He didn't just survive, he thrived. Years of relentless work led him to Lagos, where he became a partner at Zenith Chambers. Zenith Chambers wasn't just any law firm. It was a den of determined and fearless young lawyers. Tochukwu became known as the Lion of the Bar, a man who took on impossible cases and won through sheer brilliance and an unbreakable spirit. He was now established, wealthy, and influential. The very man Ifoma's parents said he would never become. The silent reality. Today, Ifoma sits in her office looking out at the Lagos skyline. On her desk is a legal journal featuring a cover story on barrister Tochukwu, the man who just won a landmark case against a multinational corporation. Henry is a good man, a dedicated doctor, and a provider. But when Ifoma closes her eyes, she doesn't see the white coats of the hospital. She sees the dusty paths of Nsukka and the law student who once promised her the world and finally gained it. only to find she was no longer there to share it. She had the doctor the world told her she needed, but her soul still belonged to the barrister, who had nothing but a dream.
The path from the lecture halls of Insuka to the prestigious mahogany desks of Zenith Chambers was paved with gravel and broken glass for Tochukwu. While his peers from wealthy backgrounds moved into comfortable pupilages with family cars and allowances, Tochukwu faced the brutal reality of a young lawyer with no godfather. The crucible, Tochukwu's ascent. Tochukwu's early years in Lagos were a masterclass in survival. He lived in a tiny, partitioned room in a crowded tenement, where the heat was stifling and the light of a single candle often served as his midnight oil. The physical toll: he would walk miles to the High Court in Igbosere to save transport fare, his black shoes worn thin at the soles, polished until they shone like mirrors to hide the cracks. He often skipped lunch, drinking water to fill the void while he spent his last naira on printing legal motions. The professional grit. At Zenith Chambers, he was the first to arrive and the last to leave. He volunteered for the impossible cases, the ones senior partners avoided because they were too complex or lacked a high payoff. Tochukwu didn't care about the pay, he cared about the precedent. He spent nights in the law library, memorizing the nuances of the Evidence Act and finding loopholes that others missed. The fearless reputation. His turning point came when he defended a group of displaced traders against a powerful land developer. Despite threats and attempts to bribe his way out of the case, Tochukwu stood his ground. His closing arguments were so fiery and logically airtight that the presiding judge remarked he hadn't seen such legal audacity in decades. This ferocity earned him his partnership. He wasn't just a lawyer, he was a force of nature. The Gilded Cage, Afoma's emotional torture. While Tochukwu fought the world, Afoma fought her own mind. On the surface, she was the picture of success, the elegant wife of Dr. Henry, a man whose kindness was as consistent as it was suffocating. Henry provided everything: jewelry, a driver, and a position at the top of his father's hospital pharmacy. But to Afoma, his touch felt like static electricity, brief, jarring, and devoid of warmth. The secret archive of the soul. To maintain her sanity, Afoma began keeping a midnight diary. It was a leather-bound book hidden behind a row of medical encyclopedias. This diary was the only place she was truly alive. In those pages, she lived a parallel life. She wrote extensively about the what-if dates. She would detail imaginary evenings in Lagos where she and Tochukwu, now successful, sat by the lagoon, discussing law and life over spicy suya and cold drinks. The romantic haunting. She recorded dreams so vivid they felt like memories. Dreams of Tochukwu's deep, resonant voice whispering her name, and the way his calloused hands used to hold her face with a reverence Henry could never replicate. The intimacy of the mind. Afoma wrote about the physical longing that consumed her. In her dreams, their lovemaking wasn't just a duty, as it often felt with Henry, but a fierce, spiritual reunion. She described the heat of his skin and the way their rhythms matched perfectly, a stark contrast to the polite, clinical marriage she resided in. The growing chasm. Every time Afoma closed her diary, the distance between her and Henry grew. She became a ghost in her own home. Emotional withdrawal. When Henry spoke of hospital expansions or social galas, Afoma would offer a practiced, plastic smile while her mind drifted back to her GST lecture hall in Insuka. The physical wall. She began staying late at the pharmacy or feigning headaches to avoid intimacy, terrified that if Henry touched her, he would feel the Tochukwu she was hiding just beneath her skin. Henry, a man trained to diagnose physical ailments, was blind to the terminal heartbreak of his wife. He saw a quiet woman, He didn't realize he was living with a woman whose heart was miles away, locked in a law firm in Lagos, held captive by a man who had finally become everything she ever wanted, but too late.
We used to have something. I don't remember it. Do you need assistance? She's gone.
The walls of the sprawling mansion drive Henry had built for Afoma began to feel less like a sanctuary and more like a silent battlefield. For Henry, a man who navigated the complexities of human anatomy with surgical precision, the mystery of his wife's heart was a diagnosis he couldn't reach. The bedroom of glass. The most agonizing part of Henry's frustration was the physical wall Afoma had constructed. It wasn't a sudden collapse of their intimacy, but a slow, agonizing erosion. Every night followed a predictable, heartbreaking script. Henry would approach her with the tenderness of a husband seeking connection, only to be met with a repertoire of excuses that became a painful routine. The pharmacist's fatigue, she would claim the stress of the hospital pharmacy had drained her, her voice flat and rehearsed. The physical shield, she began wearing elaborate, heavy sleepwear, layers of silk and cotton that acted as a psychological barrier, signaling her unavailability before a word was even spoken. The feigned sleep, often, Henry would enter the room to find her turned away, her breathing regulated and shallow, pretending to be lost in a sleep that he knew was a lie. Henry's frustration wasn't merely sexual, it was the sting of rejection. He felt like a stranger in his own bed, a provider who was allowed to give her the world but forbidden from touching her soul. He began to question himself, wondering if his touch had become repulsive or if he had failed her in a way he couldn't see. The social eclipse. Afoma's withdrawal extended far beyond the bedroom. The vibrant woman who once walked the halls of UNN with grace had vanished, replaced by a ghost who haunted the corners of her own life. The death of the socialite. Dr. Henry's position required a certain level of social visibility. There were medical galas, alumni dinners, and charity auctions. Initially, Afoma accompanied him as the trophy wife, but soon, the excuses migrated to their social life. She developed migraines every Friday night. She had urgent stock-taking at the pharmacy whenever a wedding invitation arrived. Eventually, she stopped making excuses altogether, simply stating, "I'm staying in." The professional decline. Even at the hospital pharmacy, the change was jarring. Her colleagues, who once admired her sharp wit and meticulous nature, noticed the 1,000-yard stare. She ate lunch alone in her office, the door locked. She stopped participating in the light-hearted gossip of the break room. Her laughter, once melodic and frequent, had become a rare, mechanical sound that never reached her eyes. The indoor hermit. Afoma's life became a narrow corridor between her workplace and her bedroom. She cut off her friends, ignoring calls and leaving messages unread for weeks. Her world shrunk to the size of her leather-bound diary and the memories of a man who lived across the bridge in Lagos. Henry's frustration reached a boiling point when he realized that Afoma wasn't just tired, she was absent. He would sit in their expansive living room, watching her stare out the window at nothing for hours. "Afoma, you are here, but you are not here asterisk," he once shouted in a fit of rare, desperate anger. She had responded with a look of such profound, hollow sadness that it chilled his blood. He was a doctor, and he knew a dying patient when he saw one. What he didn't realize was that Afoma wasn't physically ill, she was mourning. She was a woman living in a beautiful house, married to a successful man, yet she was starving for the determined and fearless love of a man who didn't need a father's hospital to prove his worth. Her isolation was her only way to keep the memory of Tochukwu untainted by the reality of her marriage. Every social outing avoided was a gift to the ghost of her first love. Every night spent alone was a page added to the secret history of the life she truly wanted. The silence of Aphoma's life eventually became so loud that she could no longer ignore the impulse to find the man she had lost. It started on a rainy Tuesday, the kind of weather that reminded her of Insuka, when she sat in her pharmacy and typed his name into a search bar. The digital ghost hunt. Aphoma spent weeks scouring the internet for Tochukwu surname. She searched through LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram, hoping to see a face that had aged alongside her heart. But she found nothing. Tochukwu had vanished from the digital world the moment he entered the high-stakes arena of Lagos litigation. In the world of Zenith Chambers *, privacy was a weapon. Tochukwu had scrubbed his personal profiles, choosing to exist only in legal journals and court registries. He didn't want the world to see his personal life, he wanted them to fear his legal mind. To Aphoma's growing despair, it felt as though the man she loved had been erased from the earth. The watcher in the shadows, Zenith Shark. What Aphoma didn't realize was that while she was looking for a ghost, a shark was watching her. For years, a mysterious account with the handle @Zenith Shark had been a silent follower of her private Instagram page. The account had no profile picture, just a dark silhouette, and 0 posts. Aphoma had often wondered who it was, but in her state of emotional withdrawal, she assumed it was just a random bot or a distant professional acquaintance from the hospital. @Zenith Shark never liked her photos. He never commented, but he was always the first to view her stories. When she posted a picture of a sunset with a cryptic, lonely caption, he viewed it within minutes. When she shared a photo of her pharmacy's anniversary, he was there, a silent witness to her professional success. He watched the subtle decline in her posts, from smiling photos to pictures of rainy windows and open books. Tochukwu, behind the mask of @Zenith Shark, was using the account as his only window into the life he had been forced to leave behind. He saw her sadness through the screen. He saw the doctor's wife persona she wore like a heavy cloak, and his heart ached, but he remained disciplined. He was a man of the law. He wouldn't interfere in a marriage unless he was invited. The moment of revelation, the breakthrough didn't come from a search engine. It came from a moment of professional intersection. One evening, while Henry was away at a medical conference, Aphoma was browsing a legal news site, trying to find information on the famous Zenith Chambers she had heard people whispering about at dinner parties. She clicked on a high-definition video of a press conference following a landmark Supreme Court win. The camera zoomed in on the lead partner. He was dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit, his posture commanding, his voice a deep, resonant baritone that sent a physical shock through Aphoma's body. It was him. It was Tochukwu. Driven by a sudden, frantic intuition, she went back to her Instagram and looked at the Zenith Shark profile again. She looked at the following list of the account. It followed only 3 things: the Nigerian Bar Association, UNN alumni, and her. She then noticed a tiny detail she had missed for years. In the bio of the @Zenith Shark account, there was a single quote in Latin. Ubi ama, ibi oculus. Where there is love, there is the eye. It was the same quote Tochukwu had scribbled on the back of her GST 101 notebook during their first year at Insuka. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The shark wasn't a stranger, it was Tochukwu. He had been there all along, watching her from the shadows of his success, staying silent out of respect for the very life she was currently suffocating in. Foma dropped her phone, her breath hitching in her throat. She looked at her diary, then at the screen, and finally at the door of the house she shared with Henry. The silence was over. The hunter had been found, and the shark was no longer just a ghost in her feed. The professional triumph of Barrister Tochukwu was a stark contrast to the emotional desert of his personal life. While he was a master of the courtroom, capable of dissecting witnesses with surgical precision, he was a failure at moving on. For Tochukwu, every woman who walked into his life after Afoma was merely a ghost trying to fill a space that had been permanently shaped by a pharmacy student from UNN. The search for a substitute, the three relationships. After law school, Tochukwu tried to follow the logical path. He knew he was a rising star and that a man of his status needed a partner. However, his heart was a locked vault, and he had thrown away the key back in Nsukka. 1. Amaka, the intellectual peer. Amaka was a fellow lawyer at a rival firm. She was brilliant, sharp-tongued, and understood the grueling hours of Zenith Chambers. On paper, they were a power couple. They attended bar galas together and debated case law over expensive dinners in Victoria Island. The Boyd, Tochukwu found her too clinical. When he looked at her, he didn't see the warmth he remembered in the GST halls. Their relationship felt like a merger and acquisition rather than a romance. He eventually ended it when he realized he was more interested in her legal briefs than her soul. 2. Kemi, the high society stylist. In his quest to feel something, anything, Tochukwu dated Kemi, a vibrant fashion consultant who introduced him to the glitz of Lagos nightlife. She was the polar opposite of Afoma, loud, extroverted, and deeply embedded in the social scene. The Boyd, the noise of Kemi's world only highlighted Tochukwu's internal silence. While she danced at exclusive clubs, he would sit at the VIP table, nursing a drink and wondering if Afoma still liked her tea with 2 cubes of sugar. Kemi eventually left him, frustrated by his emotional distance, calling him a man who lived in a black and white movie. 3. Blessing, the attempt at simplicity. Blessing was kind, soft-spoken, and reminded him of the humility of his own roots. She was a schoolteacher who asked for nothing but his time. The Boyd, this was the most painful failure. Tochukwu tried to love her simplicity, but he realized that he didn't just want kindness, he wanted the specific, fiery, intellectual, and spiritual spark he had with Afoma. He felt like a villain for not being able to love a good woman, eventually breaking her heart because he couldn't stop comparing her silence to Afoma's laughter. The moments of weakness, the temptation to reach out. Whenever these relationships crumbled, Tochukwu would retreat to his penthouse office at Zenith Chambers. In the dead of night, with the Lagos skyline shimmering outside, the weight of his success felt like lead because he had no one to share it with. The digital precipice. On 2 specific occasions, the chaos of his lonely life almost broke his resolve. 1. The night of the partnership. After he was named a partner, the pinnacle of his career, he sat with his phone in hand. He had found Afoma's Instagram profile. He typed out a message, "I made it, Afoma. I have the house, the name, and the security. Is it too late?" His thumb hovered over the send button for an hour before the fearless lawyer succumbed to fear. He deleted the text, realizing she was a married woman and he had no right to wreck her peace. 2. The anniversary of the breakup. On the date they had officially ended things at UNN, Tochukwu got uncharacteristically drunk on expensive scotch. He logged into at Zenith Shark and opened her latest photo, a picture of her looking pale and tired at the pharmacy. He almost called her, his heart screaming that she looked as miserable as he felt. The inner conflict. Tochiku's struggle was the success paradox. He had worked so hard to become the man Afoma's parents wanted, only to realize that in the process of becoming that man, he had lost the very woman he was doing it for. Every date was an interview she was failing. Every intimate moment with another woman felt like a betrayal of a ghost. He remained Zenith Shark, a predator in the courtroom, but a silent, pining observer in the digital world, waiting for a sign that the doctor's wife was still the girl who once shared her lunch with a poor law student. The moment Afoma realized that the mysterious Zenith Shark was Tochiko, the dams she had built around her heart for years finally burst. The silence of her bedroom, usually filled only with the rhythmic breathing of a husband she felt no spark for, was suddenly electric. Her fingers trembled as she stared at the message button. This wasn't just a DM. It was a breach of the life she had meticulously constructed. But the pain of her gilded cage was now greater than her fear of the unknown. The first reach, breaking the silence. She didn't start with "I love you," or "I miss you." She started with the one thing only they knew. At 1:14 a.m., she typed, "Does the taste of the cold opera we used to eat behind the GST?" She didn't expect an answer. She assumed a partner at Zenith Chambers would be too busy, or perhaps he had finally moved on. But the scene icon appeared almost instantly. Two gray bubbles danced on the screen, mocking her heartbeat. At Zenith Shark, "I haven't tasted anything as good since then. I've been waiting for you to find me, Afoma." The digital confession. What began as a tentative greeting turned into an all-night outpouring of years of suppressed grief and longing. Their chat became a sanctuary where the doctor's wife and the fearless barrister shared their titles. The depth of her pain, Afoma told him about her diary. She admitted that while she lived in a mansion, she was mentally living in a one-room apartment in Insuka. She told him about the emotional torture of her marriage, not that Henry was a bad man, but that he was simply not him. The revelation of the shark, Tochiko confessed why he had been following her silently. He told her about the 3 women he tried to date and how each one was a failed attempt to find her spirit in someone else's body. "I became a shark in the courtroom so I could build the world I promised you," he typed. "But I realized I built a palace with an empty throne." The evolution of the chat. As the days passed, the chatting became an addiction. It was no longer just about the past. It was about a desperate present. 1. The hidden screen. Afoma became a master of digital espionage. She changed his name in her contacts to a generic pharmaceutical supplier to avoid Henry's suspicion. She would chat with him while sitting across from Henry at dinner, her face illuminated by the glow of her phone, a secret smile playing on her lips that Henry mistakenly attributed to work success. 2. The shared dreams. They began to exchange what-if scenarios. Tochiko would describe his penthouse in Lagos and where her piano would sit. Afoma would send him snippets from her diary, the raw, unfiltered descriptions of her dreams about him. "Afoma, I dreamed of us last night. We weren't in Lagos or in Suka. We were just together. No titles, no suitors, no parents. Just you and me." Tochiko, "In my world, that isn't a dream. It's a goal. I've won every case I've ever taken, Afoma. I don't plan on losing this one." 3. The growing distance from Henry. The more she chatted with Tochiko, the more repulsive her reality became. Every "good night, honey" from Henry felt like a lie. The chat was her oxygen. Her marriage was the carbon monoxide slowly stifling her. She stopped writing in her physical diary because the chat was her living diary now. The dangerous threshold, the tone of their messages eventually shifted from nostalgic to urgent. The Zenith Shark was no longer content with just watching. Tochukwu, I see you in your photos, Afoma. I see the light that has gone out of your eyes. He provides for you, but he doesn't see you. I have the resources now. I have the name. I am no longer that boy who had nothing to offer. Afoma stared at the screen, tears blurring the text. She was a pharmacist, a wife, and a woman of reputation, but in the blue light of the chat, she was just a girl from UNN who wanted to go home. The chat had bridged the gap between Lagos and her heart, and for the first time in years, she felt the terrifying, beautiful possibility of an escape.
You're throwing everything away.
This separation brings shame to our house. Is this truly what you both want?
The silence in the mansion finally became deafening. Dr. Henry, a man trained to listen to the subtle murmurs of a failing heart, could no longer ignore the terminal state of his own marriage. The woman who shared his bed was a phantom, and the gulf between them had widened into an uncrossable ocean. Henry's breaking point, Henry's frustration turned into a cold, hard clarity. He noticed that Afoma no longer looked at him when he spoke. Her gaze was always fixed on her phone or lost in the middle distance. The final straw came when he surprised her with an anniversary trip to the Maldives, and she responded not with joy, but with a look of trapped panic. He realized he wasn't competing with another man in the room, he was competing with a ghost that lived in her mind. I have given you a life most women dream of, Henry shouted during their final confrontation. But you treat this home like a prison and me like the warden. I am a husband, Afoma, not a spectator in your life. The intervention of the elders, driven by a mix of heartbreak and wounded pride, Henry took the matter to Afoma's parents. In a traditional setting, a husband complaining to his in-laws is a grave signal that the foundation is crumbling. The parents' plea, her father, who had once championed Henry as the secure choice, was distraught. They called a family meeting, pleading with Afoma to regain her senses. They reminded her of the prestige of the marriage and the shame of a broken home. Afoma's defiance, for the first time in her life, the soft-spoken pharmacist stood her ground. She didn't shout, she simply spoke with the weary honesty of someone who had been holding their breath for years. You chose a husband for me based on his father's hospital, she told them. But you forgot that I am the one who has to live in the silence of his house. My soul is not here. It hasn't been for a long time. The finality of the gabble, when it became clear that Afoma would not, or could not, change, Henry made the hardest decision of his life. He filed for divorce. He was a man of dignity, and he refused to be a placeholder in his own home. The divorce proceedings were surprisingly quiet, because Afoma wanted nothing from the doctor's world, no alimony, no property, no settlement. The legal process moved with clinical speed. They signed the papers in a cold office, a stark contrast to the flamboyant wedding they had celebrated years prior. As they walked out of the court, Henry looked at her one last time. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for in that phone of yours, he said quietly before driving away. The road to Lagos, the return to Tochukwu. The day that Decree Nisi was finalized, Afoma did not cry. Instead, she felt a lightness she hadn't known since her third year at the University of Nigeria. She packed a single suitcase, leaving behind the designer clothes and jewelry Henry had bought her, and took the first flight to Lagos. The reunion at Zenith Chambers. She didn't call him. She didn't text. She simply showed up at the towering glass edifice of Zenith Chambers. When she stepped into the reception, the staff looked at her with curiosity. She didn't look like a high-profile client. She looked like a woman who had just traveled through a storm to find land. When the doors to the inner office opened, Tochukwu stood there. The lion of the bar froze. The Zenith Shark persona vanished in an instant. The realization, he saw her standing there, stripped of the doctor's wife armor, holding only a small bag and her dignity. He saw the woman he had watched through a screen for years, finally standing in his reality. The first words, Tochukwu didn't ask about the divorce or the scandal. He walked toward her, his bespoke suit a testament to his success, but his eyes reflecting the same boy from the GST hall. "You're late," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I had to walk the long way," Afoma replied, a genuine smile finally breaking across her face. "But I'm here now, in the heart of Lagos, surrounded by the fierce energy of his law firm." Tochukwu finally led the woman he loved to the empty throne he had built for her. The pharmacist and the barrister were no longer victims of timing or poverty. They were two people who had survived the world to find their way back to the love garden.
This merger means everything to us.
But at what cost? We're losing ourselves in the process.
Cheers to us.
Congratulations, we are so happy for you. We wish you the best.
The reunion at Zenith Chambers was not just the end of a long separation, it was the beginning of a deliberate, high-intensity courtship. Tochukwu, now a man of immense means and influence, was determined to give Afoma the life they had only dreamed of while sharing Nsukka's garden egg and groundnuts. The slow burn, reigniting the flame. Despite the years of longing, they didn't rush into the physical. They spent the first few weeks relearning each other. Tochukwu realized that Afoma was no longer just the shy pharmacy student. She was a woman who had survived emotional warfare. Afoma realized that Tochukwu's Zenith Shark persona was a shield he wore for the world, but with her, he was still the boy who quoted Latin poetry. Late-night debates, they spent hours in his Ikoyi penthouse, recreating their GST debates. He would argue constitutional law while she explained the chemistry of the brain's dopamine during love. Healing through presence, often, they would simply sit in silence, holding hands, a luxury they hadn't had for nearly a decade. For Afoma, the silence was no longer a prison, it was a sanctuary. The dates, from Nsukka dreams to Lagos reality, Tochukwu used his success to curate experiences that signaled a new era. He wanted to erase the memory of her clinical, forced marriage with Henry. The private beach escape, Tochukwu rented a private stretch of beach in Alashe. Away from the prying eyes of Lagos high society, they walked barefoot in the sand. There were no suitors, no parents, and no medical conferences, just the sound of the Atlantic and the man she had always wanted. Nostalgic luxury. One evening, Tochukwu surprised her by flying in a famous chef from Enugu to prepare a gourmet version of the local delicacies they used to eat at UNN. They sat on his terrace, overlooking the Five Cowries Creek, eating abacha and ubba paired with vintage champagne. The art of courtship. He took her to private art galleries and jazz clubs where the music was as deep as their history. In these outings, Afoma blossomed. The ghost vanished, replaced by a woman whose laughter finally reached her eyes. The romance and intimacy. Their romance was characterized by a fearless intensity. Tochukwu was intentional about every gesture. He didn't just buy her gifts, he bought her freedom. He helped her set up a state-of-the-art independent pharmacy in a highbrow area of Lagos, ensuring she was never again dependent on a man's family business. The lovemaking of souls. When they finally moved into physical intimacy, it was nothing like the mechanical duty she had felt with Henry. It was a spiritual homecoming. In the quiet of the night, with the Lagos city lights shimmering through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the union was a celebration of survival. It was fierce, tender, and underscored by the knowledge of how close they had come to losing each other forever. The marriage plans, a new covenant. Unlike her first marriage, which was a transaction of social status, their marriage plans were built on a foundation of mutual respect and long overdue justice. The defiant traditional wedding, they decided to return to their village for the traditional rites. Tochukwu, now a billionaire barrister, arrived with a convoy that silenced every critic. Afoma's father, seeing the man Tochukwu had become, tried to apologize, but Tochukwu simply held his hand and said, "I didn't come to prove you wrong, I came to show you that Afoma was right to believe in me." The Zenith celebration. The white wedding was planned for the Echo Hotel's grand ballroom. It wasn't just a wedding, it was the talk of the Nigerian legal and medical communities. Tochukwu's partners at Zenith Chambers stood as his groomsmen, a phalanx of fearless men honoring their leader's greatest victory, the future. They planned a honeymoon in Santorini, Greece, but the real plan was their life in Lagos. They designed a home that included a massive library for him and a laboratory for her. The diary's final page. Afoma took her old leather-bound diary, the one she had used to hide her dreams of Tochukwu while married to Henry, and brought it to him. On the very last page, she wrote, "The dream has ended because the reality has finally begun." They burned the diary together in a small fire on his balcony, letting the smoke of past sorrows carry away the last of the ghosts. They were no longer the law student and the pharmacy student with nothing. They were the power couple of Lagos, two souls who had proven that in the court of love, persistence always wins the case.
Prosperity and endless love. We raise our glasses to the happy couple. May your journey be filled with joy, prosperity, and endless love.
The transition from their long-awaited reunion to the formalization of their union was a masterclass in redemption. For Tochukwu, returning to Afoma's family home was not just about fulfilling tradition, it was about reclaiming the dignity that poverty had once denied him. The return of the lion, meeting the parents. The air in Afoma's family compound was thick with tension and expectation on the day of the formal introduction. Years prior, Tochukwu had been the boy they dismissed. Now, he arrived as a force to be reckoned with. The entrance, Tochukwu did not arrive with arrogance, but with the quiet confidence of a man who had won his battles. He was accompanied by senior partners from Zenith Chambers and a few influential UNN alumni, creating a convoy of black SUVs that signaled his arrival long before he stepped out. The confrontation. Afoma's father, a man of old-fashioned principles, sat in the center of the living room. The silence was heavy until Tochukwu spoke. He didn't boast about his bank account or his Lagos penthouse. Instead, he spoke of his consistency. "I stand before you not as the student who had nothing, but as the man who never stopped building a world worthy of your daughter. I am here to claim the woman who has always been mine in spirit." The acceptance, seeing the light in Afoma's eyes, a light that had been extinguished during her years with Henry, her parents realized that the safe choice had nearly cost the daughter her soul. With a mix of apology and newfound respect, they gave their blessing. The traditional rites, Igba Nkwu. The traditional wedding in the village was a vibrant explosion of Igbo culture. Tochukwu was determined to satisfy every requirement of the Igbo bride, wealth and more. The requirements, Tochukwu met the traditional lists with fearless generosity. From the premium wrappers and coral beads for the kindred women to the livestock and tubers of yam for the elders, he ensured that no one could say he fell short. He didn't just meet the requirements, he exceeded them as a tribute to Afoma's resilience. The search for the groom. In the highlight of the ceremony, Afoma, dressed in stunning George fabric and heavy coral beads, navigated the massive crowd with a cup of palm wine. When she finally found Tochukwu, she knelt and handed him the cup. He drank it all in one go, stood her up, and tucked a bundle of high-denomination notes into her hand, a public declaration that she would never know lack again. The lavish white wedding, the zenith of love. The white wedding in Lagos was a spectacle of luxury that bridged the worlds of law and medicine. Held at the grand ballroom of a 5-star hotel,
Prosperity
it was
and
designed to
endless
be
love.
the wedding of the decade.
We raise our glasses
The
to the happy
atmosphere,
couple.
the hall
May your
was
journey be filled
transformed
with
into an
joy,
imperial
prosperity,
garden, echoing
and
the
endless
love
love.
garden of UNN, but with a sophisticated twist. Thousands of white orchids hung from the ceiling, and the floor was a custom-made glass runway. The ceremony, the vows. When they stood at the altar, the room went silent. Tochukwu, the man known for his determined and fearless legal arguments, found his voice breaking. He vowed to protect her heart with the same ferocity he used to defend the law. Afoma's vows were a testament to waiting, a poetic tribute to the long way they had both traveled. The appearance, Afoma was breathtaking in a bespoke lace gown with a cathedral-length veil. Tochukwu looked every bit the zenith shark, in a midnight blue tuxedo, though his sharp features softened every time he looked at his bride. The reception. The party was an unapologetic celebration of success and love. The guest list, the who's who, of the Nigerian legal world attended. Senior advocates of Nigeria SANs rubbed shoulders with top pharmaceutical executives. The money rain. In true Lagos fashion, the dance floor became a sea of currency as friends and colleagues sprayed the couple. It was a symbolic reversal of Tochukwu's university days when he struggled to afford textbooks. The grand finale. As the night ended, the couple walked out under a canopy of sparklers. They weren't just leaving a party, they were stepping into the life they had dreamed of since that first GST lecture. Tochukwu and Afoma's story became a legend within the UNN community, a reminder that while family assistance is a head start, intentionality and grit are the true architects of a destiny that cannot be denied. They were finally home, not in a house built by a father's shadow, but in a life built by their own shared strength.